Well, elections, they say, have consequences, and we see it all around at the federal, state, and even local government levels. This morning, we're turning our attention to the coming election in Edo State. It's a big one, and it's an election that will have a ripple effect across board, because all the major parties are vying for a position in that state. That's the #1 seat of governor. Well, we have joining us on the show this morning. Just before we get into all of that field matter, let's turn our attention to this all-important conversation that touches at the heart of democracy. Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, is our guest as we walk through the coming Edo elections. Good morning, Mr. Itodo. You're welcome to the Morning Brief.
A very good morning to you all, and thanks for having me.
Well, I know that the petrol, prices will have some sort of effect on this coming election in Edo State in terms of transport costs, whether or not people want to travel all the way back to vote in that election. Seeing prices, particularly for Edo State, will be 900 plus. So I don't know if that is something that we're factoring into all of this conversation, but I just want to get your insight into, first, how you view this coming election in terms of the rhetorics that have come up, the violence, whether or not ideas are contending and all of that. Just your preliminary thoughts. And you can put in the petrol issue. Do you think it will be a major drawback for this election?
Well, once again, good morning. Of course, the petrol issue will be a defining factor in this election. Yaga Africa has released 3 pre-election observation reports. And in those reports, we did highlight the fact that economic hardship and the scarcity or the challenge of accessing and procuring fuel will be a fundamental problem. What the politicians in Edo have been doing in the last couple of weeks is to use, to exploit this situation to entice voters. And we've seen where free petrol have been declared, for the voters in Edo. And in the last 2 months, there are dedicated petrol stations where politicians have procured, fuel and have asked voters, to go to those, and their supporters to go to those fuel stations to access fuel. But that also has logistical implications as well, because as you heard from INEC, that the transport workers have also increased, the cost of their services as a result of this fuel scarcity. And if INEC is unable, to meet those demands, even though we understand that they've reached an agreement, there will be logistical challenge on the day of election, because what you would find is that those transport workers will refuse, to provide their cars for deploying electoral material. So I don't think we're out of the woods yet. It's important that we call on the road transport workers that, yes, we understand this is an economic challenge, that everyone is affected, but that the election is very important, and they should, uphold the commitments that they have made to providing their vehicles to help INEC deploy those materials in all the local governments so elections can commence early on Saturday. But just moving away from the fuel issue, there are about 6 defining issues, what we call defining issues for this election. It is clear that the politicians are not preparing for elections this weekend. They're preparing for a showdown because this election, sadly, it's not a competition of ideas and issues. It is more a clash of political heavyweights. And in all the conversations, the interest of the people of Edo State, has not been the topmost priority. Of course, zoning is also another critical issue, and how power is shared between the central zone, the northern zone, as well as the southern zone. The other big issue that we see is this strong arm tactics and the use of violence. In Yaga Africa's pre-election observation report, we did highlight some of the pre-election violence, that we observed in some of the local governments. And in a short while, we'll look at, what are those flashpoints and those hotspots for violence. Of course, INEC integrity, and competence is also another big issue for this election. And the way INEC manages this election will define its outcome. money politics is a bigger issue, but also pre and post election litigation. We've seen in the build-up to this election, there have been allegations, there have been litigations as a result of acrimonious party primaries. Those pre-election issues are still there.
Mr. Itodo, before you exhaust all of those issues, let's begin to take them one by one. And speaking of which, one of the big tests for this election, according to your document, may well be the integrity of security agencies. And that is a sticking point, particularly with the allegations leveled by the PDP in the state that some members, leaders of its party who will form a big factor on election day have been arrested. And on the other hand, we saw months ahead of today the murder of that police officer that is yet to be investigated. Perhaps if it's being investigated, the police hasn't come out, to tell us exactly what happened. So what should the police be doing at this point in time to demonstrate its impartiality, particularly on election day?
Well, if you look at the next slide, from Yiga Africa's perspective, there are three big tests that underpin the Saturday elections. And let me start with the second one, which is the impartiality test, because, Bukola, you raised the question about the police. I think that the police will be tested, especially our security agencies, will be tested on Saturday. And the big question is whether our security agencies will maintain neutrality and impartiality in the management of election security operations, because there are concerns about whether you call it federal influence or federal might to influence the outcome of the election. These are based on allegations from political actors. There are also concerns that there is no level playing field because the security agencies have gone and arrested, political actors. These are concerns, and what the police needs to do, and I'm excited to hear that the IG, has repeatedly said that they will be impartial, they will be professional. We're going to hold him to his words and expect that on Saturday, that there will, or prior to Saturday, there won't be, sort of arbitrary arrest and detention of political actors from any divide. That on Saturday, there will not be protection for thugs, of any political party who will be deployed to the polling stations to disrupt elections. These are big issues that we feel that it's important that we actually consider. Now, the police have said, that vigilantes and state security outfits are not part of the election security architecture. This is not new. This is the conventional practice in previous elections in other states. Vigilante groups, state-sponsored security outfits are not part of the election security architecture, also based on the provisions of the Electoral Act. So there's absolutely nothing new with this pronouncement. I think the police is just reminding us of the policy and the provisions of the law. So we expect them, to act professionally and impartially and to address the concerns political stakeholders have made, because they will be undergoing an impartiality test on Saturday. The second big test is the resilience test. And this is actually on the part of the voters, because voters, need to show up on Saturday to vote for candidates of their choice. If you look at the data, the voter turnout for Edo governorship elections have declined. In 2016, it was 32%. In 2020, it came down 20-something%, and now we don't know what the turnout will be, because it came out to about 27%. And so there was an 8% decline from 2016 to 2017 in 2020. In the light, of this sort of early warning signs of violence, in the light of this adverse weather condition like rainfall, we hope that the voters will defy all odds, show up to cast their votes, and not be scared, about some of this violent rhetoric. The last biggest test is the integrity test. And there are four fundamental questions, and this relates to INEC. And the first critical one, with respect to, the integrity test that INEC will undergo, is one, that will all the sensitive materials, ballot papers and result sheets, and even non-sensitive materials, will they be deployed promptly to all the local governments in the state so voting can commence promptly? That will determine, whether the election meets the integrity test. The other one is whether INEC will maintain consistency, in enforcing and implementing the rule on suspending election in cases where there is substantial disruption of election, because Section 24 of the Electoral Act is very clear. And so if you have early warning signs of violence, if it appears that politicians are preparing for a showdown, they might instrumentalize violence to undermine the elections. So how is INEC going to apply, the rule on suspending elections where there is substantial disruption is critical. The third sort of test is whether INEC will instrumentalize its power, to do what? To review declarations and returns made under duress or in contravention of the electoral law. Because INEC has the power to review results. We expect that in the light of this election warning signs, that you will see situations where officials will be forced to announce results. But INEC will need to do what? To enforce its own power by reviewing those declarations.
All right, Mr. Itodo, let's talk about some of the things you said. Part of your release that talked about flashpoints and hotspots and what you would expect to happen. I can see that it's quite dominant in places like Edo South, where we have Ovia North, Ovia South, Oredo, Kobaha, as well as in the north where we have Esako, East and West, and even in Esan South and all of this. Given the fact that these are possible flashpoints, and from what you've seen and what you've observed, there will be fireworks, most likely. What should we be using as metrics to measure how the security agencies will be able or have been able to do their job? Because this looks like, okay, we know what is coming. We should be prepared for what is coming, not to be reactive, rather should be proactive. I know you're not a security expert, but from an observer point of view and somebody who has been involved in election, what are the failures you've seen when these things happen that can be corrected before it happens?
I think that in the pre-election period, there's a lot that the security agencies can do. And the first is mopping the small and light arms that are almost everywhere in the States. There is a proliferation of small and light arms based on our observation reports. And we expect that the police can mop up, all these arms. They know these actors. They know where these arms are. And even if they don't, this is where intelligence actually comes in. But it's also not just the police, but the other security agencies, ensuring that they mop up all the small and light arms that are in the custody of thugs and cultists across the different divides. So let's not make any mistake that this is just about one particular political party. On the major political divides, you have thugs on both sides. You have groups, that are being instrumentalized for violence. So there is a need to mop up those arms. The second point is what's the level of protection, that will be provided for INEC officials to deploy materials in these flashpoints of violence and these local governments, that we have identified based on our pre-election observation. Because we don't want a situation where on Friday, where the materials will be deployed to the local governments and to the racks, that police officers and security agencies will not accompany these materials. Because what we have seen in some states is that INEC is ready to deploy, but there are no security agencies to accompany INEC deployed to those states. And if the police is deploying this large number of officials, we don't expect that INEC officials will be stranded when materials are going to be deployed. The second, or the third rather, is that on the day of elections, how do you ensure that thugs don't disrupt votes and voting and accreditation in some of those flashpoints of violence or in the strongholds of political actors? Because what we have seen is cases where thugs are deployed to polling units, they foment violence, And there is no reprimand of any nature. In fact, in some cases, we've seen how, there are some security agencies, or perhaps uniform security agencies, provide protection for these thugs. We have been told that those who do that are actually fake police officers or fake security agencies. But we don't want to see any of that also happen. But lastly, is about the results collation process. We have seen cases where accredited observers, accredited party agents, accredited journalists are not granted access to ward collation centers, local government collation centers. INEC has accredited, these stakeholders, and security agencies should not prevent them from accessing those locations. These are some of the parameters we would want to see, including the fact that every official, security official who is on election duty needs to be properly identified so that we don't have these cases of either fake police officers or fake security agencies, who are, in actual fact, thugs who are masquerading as security agencies, deploying violence to undermine the outcome of the elections.
So, in short, the success of this election will be decided by maybe three major people or at three major places: the polling stations, that's INEC; the police station, that is the security operatives, police leading and others in that sector, and at the petrol station too, because people will need petrol, and this will decide whether or not they will come out or how they will vote. And that leads me to my next question. And this is at the heart of the election itself, whether or not voters are rational in their approach to voting. Have you seen, because we've seen the political, the candidates and the political parties, we've seen what they're clashing on, not really based on ideas or, solutions in that sense. What we're seeing is a clash of personalities, throwing, shades at each other, mud at each other. You hear some words and you're thinking, they shouldn't come out of the mouth of a politician, attacking, based on personalities and personal issues. So I'm concerned for the voters who are watching. Do you think they will go out there to vote rationally and say, well, I think this person would fix the challenges we have? By the way, we're in an existential threat situation, so we need people that can fix the problem, right? So do you think voters in Edo State will go out to vote rationally based on what they've been presented with, or in spite of what they've been presented with, they will still vote rationally and say, well, I'm voting for this person based on the ideas they brought to the table?
Well, in the field of elections, there's a debate whether voters make rational choices or they make emotional choices. And I won't get into that dialectic. I think what is critical is whether the political actors, are not serving the people a fait accompli as a result of how they have engaged this election. It is really sad that there was a debate, hosted by one of the media organizations, but that the main political actors didn't show up. Only one of the candidates from one of the parties that showed up. And that's disturbing. They didn't avail the people, of Edo State the opportunity to debate some of their policies. And it's just been a clash of personalities. And we expect that first voters will show up. And, at Yaga Africa and the whole of the civil society community, we're calling on the voters in Edo State, to come out, defy all odds. This is an opportunity to show resilience, because if you don't show up, to vote on Saturday, someone else is voting for you, and then you're going to have a leadership that will be determined by a minority. The turnout for last election was 27%, and some of this violent rhetoric, one of the goals it seeks to serve is to demotivate people to show up, because when people don't show up, elections can be rigged and they can be stolen easily. So
pardon me, Mr. Itodo.
Should show up.
Pardon me to come in here.
And when you show up,
forgive me to butt in quickly. I wanted to add this point. Something played out recently, and it's about this, debate thing. There was meant to be a debate in a certain part of the country, right? And, some people started spreading news that rather than spend money to organize a debate, they should give them the money instead so they can feed themselves. And, you know, this became a thing, and it was almost going to turn violent. Like, if you hold this debate, we're going to scatter it. Why spend money doing a debate when you can give us the money to get food? So it also speaks to the thinking, the rationality or emotionality of the voters themselves, of people, whether or not they see the big picture. But you can land on that point you were making. I just wanted to put that in.
I totally agree with you that people are hungry. People are dissatisfied with how political leadership have managed their affairs. They do not appreciate or understand why, having voted for political leaders, their social conditions have not improved. So I can understand. But are we interested in short-term, mid-term, or long-term gains? And this is why people need to show up. And despite the fact that the politicians have denied the people the opportunity to debate and share some of their plans, I think that voters should still look at, you know, the actors and the candidates and just try, you know, to determine who has your interest at heart. A lot of people are going to be voting based on the zoning arrangement. They're going to be voting based on personalities. But personalities don't put food on your table. Personalities don't provide you security. Personalities don't address long-term issues that have deprived you of political and economic opportunity. The voters should go out on Saturday, you know, and make choices that are based on their conviction that a political party or a candidate has what it takes to solve the problems that they face in the state, and not just look at sentiments or emotions to influence the way they cast their vote. These politicians, with all the brickbats that we've seen, they have their way of settling their scores. You'll be very shocked that right after the elections, you will see them drinking, eating together. So there is no need for you to step into this inter-elite conflict that we see in Edo State. But look at, as voters, who has the capacity, who has the competence, who has the character to deliver on some of the promises that they have made in the long term. And one who also, you know, listens to the people. I think it is very, very important, because the people in Edo State are looking for a transformative and accountable and a responsive leadership.
And, you know, regardless of the motivation of the voters in this election, your earlier commentary pretty much supports the point that election is a multi-stakeholder engagement, and the success anchors on the police, the politicians, and indeed INEC itself. But if we took the conduct of the politicians into consideration, Mr. Itodo, this morning, which, you know, forms at least two of the high points in the issues that you raised in your document. You talked about a clash of political heavyweights, money politics, and strong arm tactics and violence. If these factors will determine the conduct on Saturday, should we take it for granted that after Saturday, the politicians will be headed to courts and the election may not be decided, at least definitively, on Saturday?
That's a very interesting question, Bukola, because one of the slides speaks to some of the issues that we said they are the big issues to note. It is clear that the stage has been set for post-election litigation. Even the pre-election litigation, you have close to 10 pre-election cases from political parties. As you can see, prior to last week, there were only 17 parties on the ballot. But one of the parties that failed to meet the deadline for submission of candidates went to the courts and procured, you know, a judgment, an order of court, and so the party have been added to the ballot by virtue of court order. We've also seen several litigations challenging the outcomes of the primaries, and so we expect that, you know, in the post-election period, there will be post-election litigation for three reasons. The first one, this is a highly competitive election. And in a highly competitive election, the margin of lead may not be as wide as we might think. We don't perhaps expect a landslide victory, so highly competitive. Secondly, is a clash of political heavyweights. Those factors actually matter because what you're going to see is an appropriation of strong arm tactics and violence to influence the outcome of the election, because every political actor on all the divide is deploying different tactics to undermine each other and see if they secure electoral victory. The third one is that there is pressure, even on the Electoral Commission, to deliver a credible election. Because if it doesn't, it becomes a recipe for violence, but then people are going to question, the outcome of the election. And that's why in one of the slides we're drawing people's attention to the following. The first one is overvoting. That based on the law, based on the decision of the Supreme Court, you need 3 documents that must be tendered to prove overvoting. The first one is the voters register. The second one is the BVAS machine. And the third one is the Form EC8A, the result sheet at the polling unit. Voters need to be conscious of this, that where there is overvoting, like we have seen, in previous election, these 3 documents are critical to prove overvoting. So don't allow talks take away the BVAS machines, because when they destroy the BVAS machines or steal them, even though it's a national asset, it will be difficult to prove overvoting. Also, the result sheets are very sensitive, so you need to keep an eye on the result sheets so that they are not stolen or destroyed. The second issue to note is that collation of results, as far as the Nigerian electoral system is concerned, is manual. Collation of results is manual, that the IREV is not part of the collation system based on the decisions of the Supreme Court. That's the current state of the law. But IREV is for public viewing purposes. That even though it's for public viewing purposes, it's not part of the collation system, you still need to keep an eye on the IREV, download the results, and use that to compare the manual process. The third one, which is also very critical, is how a winner will be determined on Saturday. There are 2 conditions that a candidate must meet to be declared a winner. The first one is that they must score majority of lawful votes. And secondly, they must score, 25% in 2/3 of the 18 local governments of the state. Therefore, a candidate must secure 25% in 12 local governments, because 12 represent 2/3 of the state. In other words, if a candidate secures majority of votes in 12 local governments, they will be declared winner. And lastly is the margin of lead principle. Bukola, you raised a very critical point. And this is where there are concerns. How will the margin of lead principle be applied? And what it means is that if in a competitive race of this nature, where there is no landslide victory, if the margin of lead between the top 2 candidates is less than the total number of voters who collected their PVCs in polling units where elections were either postponed, elections did not hold, or elections were cancelled, the election will not be conclusive. It will be declared inconclusive. And the rationale is that if the voters who collected their PVCs in polling units where elections were cancelled, where elections were postponed, or elections did not hold, if they vote, it will affect the overall outcome. And we pray we don't get into that situation, that the election is concluded, on first ballot, but then it's going to take the cooperation of all stakeholders. And in an election of this nature, where early warning signs already show, possibilities of violence, political actors can actually exploit this situation. This is where INEC needs to demonstrate consistency in the application of the margin of lead principle.
Mr. Itodo, so let's dig further with a profound sense of respect to the candidates themselves, but this is clearly a battle of ego between Governor Godwin Obaseki and Senator Adams Oshiomhole. The last time Adams Oshiomhole was able to secure and influence people or the process by supporting a candidate to emerge as a governor was Governor Obaseki's first coming. On the flip side, this is the first time the political prowess of Godwin Obaseki will be tested, because in 2016, he was supported by Adams Oshiomhole. In 2020, he was supported by Governor Nyesom Wike and others within that rank. So now this is the first time he will be tested politically, whether he has stature or not. So that's why I say it's a battle of ego. One did it 8 years ago. He's trying to make recovery. This one is trying to make a map. So we have a very serious case in our hand. But I want, based on this background, I want to zoom in on the INEC officials. What do you think the INEC official can do? Because we've seen a scenario where either gun pointed to their head or their lives threatened and they are forced to write result. If that happens and the man or woman is forced to write a result and he goes to INEC to say, I was forced, will it be a word against his word against whoever is accusing him of, no, that's not what happened? How does this play out? Because we have to look at all the scenario if we want to have a proper election, even if it's not going to be perfect.
Well, at Yaga Africa, we've built all these scenarios, especially around the law and INEC's guidelines. And I would say this, that the success of Saturday's election will be contingent on the personal integrity of the INEC officials and the security agencies managing this election. Now, you can put every instrument and every mechanism in place. If the individuals who are the polling units managing the elections, if the individuals who are deployed to manage election security, if they do not have, regard for integrity, transparency, and accountability, there's absolutely nothing you can do. So the personal integrity of those people is critical. Now, integrity is not written on the face. INEC has recruited polling officials. It's trained those officials. But we know, based on practice and experience, that politicians compromise election officials. In the recent elections in Kogi State, where, you saw core members who were arrested, with several funds, and they were, responsible for pre-filling result sheets. Those are cases where they were compromised by polling officials. And so, INEC needs to introduce mechanisms that checkmate the excesses of its staff. And this is where the decision taken by the Electoral Commission on the day of election is very critical. So let's start. One. Now, we have cases where officials have been trained, especially collation officials have been trained, and supervisors, and then there is last minute or 11th hour substitution of those officials without any explanation. So we need to keep an eye on the electoral officers in the 18 local governments of Edo State. And I know, and I'm aware, that the INEC leadership understands the implications of this, and they are available to take any action where there is a report filed. This is where media organizations and civil society need to, be on top of their game. And if there are questions, accountability questions, and they observe anything untoward, they should report to the INEC leadership in Abuja to take action at the state. The second is when a polling official, do what? Reports that they've been forced to declare results. The key question is, what's INEC's remedial action? The law empowers INEC. And so for the INEC leadership, the collation officers are important. Who are those who will be collating the results at the ward level? If those people are compromised, Geoffrey, they would accept that result and tabulate it. Because you ask yourself, how come, there are cases where there is overvoting, where elections are cancelled, but you see collation officers admit the results and collate them. But it's about what INEC's monitoring mechanism is. If these reports come, INEC should take action and not allow the returning officer make a declaration before they take remedial action.
So let's wind down on these 2 points. One is the role of IREF. It's been said that IREF will be used for just public viewing and not for collation, whether or not that can be an issue on the one hand. But the bigger one is PDP's call for the REC to be redeployed over family ties with the FCT minister, whom said, well, yes, but nobody can change. Even the INEC chairman, he says, cannot sway the REC. And INEC has come out to say, well, the election is not decided by the REC, but by the voters. But we know how much power officials wield. And you mentioned even ad hoc core members and all of those people, they wield powers, not to talk of the REC. We saw what happened, I think it was in Adamawa State, and how that played out eventually. By the way, we've not gotten closure to that yet. So I'd like you to speak to that. Do you think that's feasible? Do you think that would also taint that process and the eventual outcome?
I think it's public knowledge that there have been concerns expressed, by the current rec of Edo State as a result of affinity with one of the ministers of the federation. That's not in doubt. The minister has also confirmed it right here in channels when he granted an interview on one of your shows. I think that the rec will not be moved. The concerns have been noted. But what I expect, from INEC is the monitoring mechanism that is in place, to address some of the concerns, legitimate concerns that have been expressed. I don't agree that, the rec cannot undermine the election. He can. There are several powers that he has. They've been donated to him by the Electoral Commission. But I want us to give the rec the benefit of doubt, for Saturday. And we have to keep an eye, on all the officials, not just the rec, but all the officials deployed, and see, whether they will meet this integrity test. And this is where vigilance actually comes in. Party agents should be trained in such a way that they can detect any element of fraud in the course of this entire process. If the process is not transparent, rest assured that there are civil society organizations that will, detect and release our information. For us at Yaiga Africa, we are deploying the parallel vote tabulation for this election, and that's a standard methodology that can detect fraud. If the results are manipulated in any way, we will expose it, as we have done in previous elections. And if they are not, we would also tell the Nigerian people because of this standard methodology that we employ. And so INEC has a role in the decision that it makes. If it's consistent with its decision, if it implements its guidelines strictly and also provisions of the law, if the collation process is transparent, if ward and local government collation officers are people of impeccable character, and the people don't undermine the process, then we can say that there's a substantial compliance with the rules. But currently, there's a shadow of doubt that has been cast on the election. There's a crisis of confidence on INEC, and INEC, can restore public confidence in the way that it managed this election. But I don't think that the rec, will be moved. He will man the election. There are supervisory national commissioners who are also deployed, to Edo. There are also other resident electoral commissioners. So I think there's a lot that is in place to keep him in check. But like Frederick Douglass said, the prize for liberty is eternal vigilance. So I call on the political actors to keep an eye on all the institutions, not just INEC, but the security agencies, as well as the other political actors as well.
Well, as I said, we've not gotten closure to the Adamawa situation, that former rec, Hudu Yunusa Ari. Last we heard was a warrant of arrest issued. But, see how slow justice is grinding. But we have to thank you so much. All eyes on Edo State this weekend, and we'll definitely be giving Nigerians full value for that election. Samson Itodo, Executive Director at Yaiga Africa. Thank you for your time and your work. Wish you the very best.
Thank you very much.